Well, thank you all for being so attentive, and thank the presenters for such captivating, thought-provoking presentations. From David, we heard about the exciting world of gaming and animation. He spoke about the different models of financial support and that cause distribution to be cheaper. Well, all of the presenters got into the different digital models for distribution and barriers to entry, and every one of them introduced us to the concept, and we have heard about it here in Jamaica, of crowdfunding. We have heard about the Creative Commons and the anti-piracy techniques. Now let's hear from you with your questions. It's been that clear, nobody chomping at the bits to ask questions? Yes, sir.
I have one question. It's, I think, best targeted to Mr. Greenspan, is it? And Ms. Smart. It's about digital distribution, particularly for Jamaica, this region. Yeah. Not so much on PC, but definitely on platforms such as Apple or gaming consoles, PlayStation and such. You have region locking. Now, where you have a small independent that is trying to build his name, sometimes it's difficult whereby you cannot actually access the Nintendo eShop from this region. So it's one thing for us to put our content out there, but where even those that may know us because we grew up in the community and say, hey, buy my product, they can't access it without a relative abroad with an address that they can use or a US credit card. The question that I'm asking is, do you see anywhere in the foreseeable future any change in region locking or zoning that may allow for the global stage that technology is actually promoting? Or is it just the inherent barriers that we'll never get away from?
That's a great question.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
That's a great question. And I'm not
Still not hearing you.
I'll pass that one. Okay. That's a great question, and I'm not involved much in that particular issue, but the big concern for a lot of companies is whether the property is licensed. And so you're actually limited to where you can distribute that particular product.
Okay.
But I'm trying to think, Microsoft has a worldwide license, so I would assume that if you have a worldwide license that you could distribute in different places. But again, I'm not sure who initiates that lock. Is it a licensor? Is it a publisher? I don't really know the answer to that question.
Okay.
And I'm sorry about that.
All right.
But
Thank you very
that's
much.
something I'm definitely going to look into.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it is a challenge that for us in the local office, for example, of Microsoft, that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Because we have invested in a country, we have to follow the laws. And a part of it is understanding the impact of breaching the laws in each country. So the process of turning on services per country is a tedious process of going through each country's requirements to make things available. So for example, if we don't have a Data Privacy Act yet, then how do we turn on cloud without going through all the other acts and getting to the point where we can feel comfortable that we're not going to be breaching anything when we do bring a service to market? So I'll give you hope. Live on your phone is available. The Xbox isn't yet available, here, but live.com, for example, is now available. So therefore, the game that I referenced earlier, developed by a local entrepreneur, is definitely accessible locally. So it's a process that we go through, and once you see entities investing in the country, then that's what needs to be done to be compliant.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Can I add to that? Because there's also the issue of encryption laws, which is why they also have this region coding and we are not part of, if we don't subscribe to certain, in terms of the Wassenaar Convention as well, then the technologies can't cross certain borders as well. So that's part of this region coding that they also have. And it's also a part of their business models as well in terms of how they distribute their intellectual property. One of the things that I would like to add, because I have that as well as one of the questions, which goes to the whole question of the crowdfunding, because a part of the development in terms of our own local content is how are we going to deal with the question of funding in relation to the local creative industries. And it seems to me that maybe crowdfunding is something that we need to start looking into. Next question.
Good afternoon. Not a question per se, but a challenge to JIPO, right? I would include the local persons on this panel right here now. And the challenge would be to the government of Jamaica, right? Via JIPO, who is putting on this whole conference, to focus less on deterring our efforts at copyright extension and more on matters as was just raised, like turning on services in the region. It is clear, right, that we have the content, right, that will soon fall into the public domain if we remain at 50 years. It is clear that we have the content to carry all these experiments that these young persons, I have no clue, I'll ask my sons when I go home, all these experiments that these young persons are talking about, right, in terms of earning potential. The greatest intellectuals in the region have already stated, Professor Best, Professor Nettleford among them, right, that intellectual property is our only way forward. We now have methodology, we now have systems, right? So I would advise, right, JIPO, right, without any more research papers, right, paying lawyers a lot of money to do, right, to just get to the point that is coming out of certainly today's discussion, and I'm sure looking at the presenters yesterday, it was the same yesterday, to just get to the point now. It will be good, and this is just straight emotion now, people, it will be good for a government to just say, you know, we believe in you intellectually. Kenia spoke about trust. That is the reason why we don't turn up for these population census surveys. We hide the 50 people in our homes. We don't feel a need to trust each other. It would be good if coming out of these seminars, we say, you know, based on what these young persons have mentioned today and all the examples that they are giving us, yes, copyright term extension is now, copyright term is now 75 years, and here's what we are going to do as a government. Just a challenge, no questions.
There's a response from Ms. Carol Simpson.
Thank you, Steve. We're always up to the challenge. I'm not sure what Steve meant by JIPO deterring efforts for copyright term extension. Okay, you did say JIPO, but let's clarify. Steve is saying the government. We have made the submission, and the strongest lobbyists for extension really have come from the music industry. So we take your point, Steve. I'm very pleased that our Minister of State is here, and certainly I'm sure when she has her meetings and she does meet with her colleagues, because part of this also is a legislative process, it's policy making, and we know that we have the support of our minister in that regard. So we're up to your challenge, Steve.
Next question,
Yeah,
go ahead.
my concern is to Ms. Lindo. The use of images on social network, for instance, Facebook, etc. Can carnival costumes, for instance, be protected in places like Facebook, where designers and so on have spent a lot of time and energy creating elaborate costumes, and it's put up on Facebook or in the social network media, and possibly is vulnerable to exploitation commercially. What's the protection? Any advice?
Well, I believe the photographs on Facebook would be really covered by image rights. And as you've seen, you perhaps can protect the actual image itself of the costumes. But separate and apart from that, and I suspect you're from Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm not sure if you have a Designs Rights Act. Right. But separate and apart from that, the actual design of the costume is protected by copyright, and if it is protected under any specific designs legislation which you may have. So it's not necessarily images which you need to, try to prevent any sort of dissemination of. It's really any sort of reproduction of the costumes. And certainly the law exists to protect that. copyright.
Um,
Does that answer your question?
No, I'm not sure if I understand it carefully, but the thing about it is, can for instance, in a costume, which is a very contentious thing in most of the carnival world, which is not only Trinidad, the costume is designed by someone, it's performed by somebody else, and they dance to somebody else's music, right? So the point about the protection is a three-partite operation. And even the fellow who designed it will never play, he never been in a costume. In terms of the stripping of rights, is there a strip of rights for somebody who performs that kind of, whose costume is on the Facebook, for instance?
No, well, again, the costume itself is protected by design rights. It's protected by the copyright behind it. And that copyright would, of course, protect the person who drew the design on a piece of paper from the very get-go. Now, in terms of the dissemination of it, if someone wants to take that Facebook photograph and share it with someone in South Africa, there's nothing really you can prevent, there's nothing you can do to prevent that per se. And I don't believe that that sharing action infringes perhaps the design rights that's inherent in the...
Okay.
So I'm no lawyer, but I would just say that if someone were to copy the costume in Brazil, I think that's what you're asking? Is that your concern? So as an example, in Brazilian Carnival, if someone copies a Trinidad Carnival costume, that's an infringement. But the challenge now is defensibility. Are you willing to go to Brazil to defend your IP? So that's the challenge that you always have to balance. Having the IP, and then how do you defend it? And so it goes back to the business models that I was discussing.
I think it also goes back to what Andrea was saying in her earlier presentation, that, well, certainly in Jamaica, the rights holders are not, the local rights holders do not invest in their IP rights as a general matter, and that is what I have also found. I don't know if that is what is happening in Trinidad, but we need to see the rights holders taking the very same steps that we see of the international rights holders that they are taking to invest in the protection of their IP. So maybe that's something that ought to be happening as well in Trinidad in relation to your image rights. Or design rights, I should say. Design rights.
Good afternoon. I'd like to throw this question out to the entire panel, whoever sees fit to answer it. My question is based on the two-way street of revenues from the part of the consumer and as well as the part of the developer. For the majority of Jamaicans, they don't have access to US-based accounts or even credit cards. Are there any, first part of the question is, are there any developments being made through either development banks or commercial banks that will allow local Jamaicans easier access to purchase things online by local developers or regional developers? And in terms of for the developers of the apps or the websites or whatever it may be, what is the way that they may earn? How do they get their money locally without having access to US-based accounts? Because my experience on the online world is that if you don't have a US-based account, if you don't have a credit card that is usable for the US, then you don't count.
You can make the money, but you can't collect it and you can't transfer it.
Yes.
And even so, it's a huge...
Can we focus on answering the question?
I am aware of the pain, and in fact, I believe the Minister of State and the Minister of STEM has that on his checklist of items that we have to clear up as we try to drive the app development industry. So yes, we know about PayPal. The Bank of Jamaica has recently implemented the transaction acts related to transfer of funds. But there's no easy answer. I think the biggest thing that has held Jamaica back is this idea of not wanting to go towards credit cards, not wanting to have a digital footprint. If you don't have that, even a credit card, a debit card that is connected to the Visa or MasterCard system, if you don't have something, then it's going to be hard to pull your money and pull it back into Jamaica. So I would recommend that you just stay tuned to listen to what is coming out of Ministry of STEM, and I suppose the Ministry of Industry and Commerce would also be interested in this, in terms of how we're making the relationship with PayPal so that it will come back in the other direction. Okay. That's one of the fastest ways that other countries use.
Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your questions. Join me in thanking the panel. At this time, however, some final comments from the Executive Director, Ms. Carol Simpson, before we close off. She's going to make some final announcements. Okay, someone wants to ask one quick question.
One quick question. I called JIPO some time ago regarding a digital magazine and how I go about copywriting it. The response I got was, well, you already own a copyright, no need to go through that process. What is the real deal?
But that's the correct answer. That's the correct answer. The copyright is created. That's the law. The copyright is created once the idea is fixated in a physical environment. Yes. So that's the correct answer.
Thank you so much, Meg. Thank you, everyone, for this session. Let's give a round of applause again to all our panelists and our moderator. Just a few announcements before we break for lunch, to say that attorneys who are participating in who participated in this morning's session in particular, that we'll be seeking CLPD credits for it, and I'm asking you to sign the form that Marcus Goff, the form is right here. Please sign the form before you leave. The Gleaner, again, is giving away free 1-month online subscription to first 5 people to sign up. I don't know if that was 5 or 50, but please check their booth in the shopping hub. The Exim Bank is also adding client advice services for one-on-one discussion. For those of you who participated in the session yesterday or do have an interest in terms of accessing loans and services that will be available from the Exim Bank, please visit their booth and they'll set up one-on-one advice services for you today and for all of tomorrow as well. Lunch will begin immediately after this session and will end at 2:30 sharp. I'm sorry that we have to be very strict on our time frame so that we can accommodate the next panel, which is really going to be very, very interesting, and it will be a long session. So we ask that you come back here or close for lunch by 2:30. We'll be asking to get back in. Tickets are available downstairs. They are limited, but tickets will be available for persons who wish to purchase lunch downstairs in the lunch area. Thank you very much.